There was one decision I never made. Not because I didn't know it was there. Not because I didn't feel it pressing against me year after year. I avoided it because I understood, even back then, that once I chose, everything would change. So I built my life around not choosing. At first, it felt harmless. Even wise. I told myself I was being patient, thoughtful, responsible. I believed that waiting was a form of intelligence, that if I observed long enough, if I analyzed every angle, the right answer would eventually reveal itself without risk. But life doesn't work like that. Life keeps moving, even when you stand still. I remember the early days clearly. Back when the future still felt wide, when time felt generous. People around me were making choices, wrong ones, brave ones, messy ones. They failed loudly. They loved deeply. They learned by impact. I watched them and told myself I was different. More controlled. More disciplined. What I really was afraid. Not of failure. Of responsibility. Because choosing means owning the outcome. And if I never chose, then nothing was ever truly my fault. That logic carried me far. Farther than I expected. I built a life that worked on paper. A life that made sense when explained out loud. Every step was justified. Every compromise had a reason. Every delay sounded temporary. Years passed before I noticed the cost. It wasn't pain that warned me. It was absence. A quiet thinning of emotion. Joy felt distant, like a memory that no longer belonged to me. Sadness didn't arrive either. Just a flat, constant neutrality. Days blended together. Weeks disappeared without leaving impressions. I told myself this was adulthood. That intensity fades. That this was what stability looked like. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't stable. I was suspended. The decision I avoided wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve running away or breaking everything apart. It was simpler, and that made it more dangerous. It was the decision to commit fully to a direction instead of keeping every door slightly open. I wanted certainty without sacrifice. Meaning without loss. A future that didn't exclude any other possible future. So I chose nothing. And nothing chose for me. The strange thing is, people praised me for it. They called me calm. Rational. Grounded. Someone who didn't rush. Someone who thought things through. No one sees indecision when it wears the mask of maturity. Inside, though, I felt like a guest in my own life. Always present, never rooted. I participated in conversations about the future without feeling included in them. I nodded at plans that didn't excite me and postponed the ones that scared me. Whenever the question resurfaced, the one I kept buried, I pushed it down again. Later, I said. When things are clearer. When I'm more ready. But readiness never came. Because readiness isn't something you wait for. It's something you create by choosing. I didn't understand that yet. I thought avoiding one decision meant avoiding regret. I thought keeping options open meant keeping freedom. What I didn't realize was that every year I waited, the cost of choosing increased and the cost of staying the same grew invisible. Until one day, I looked at my life and felt something I couldn't explain. Not anger. Not sadness. Grief. Grief for a life that never happened. For a version of myself that existed only in hesitation. That was the moment I understood, the most dangerous decision is the one you never make. And I had built my entire life around avoiding it. Once that grief appeared, it didn't leave. It followed me quietly, like a shadow I couldn't step away from. I would be in the middle of ordinary moments, conversations, errands, routines, and suddenly feel it press against my chest. Not enough to stop me, just enough to remind me that something essential was missing. I began replaying my life in fragments. Not the big moments, but the pauses. The conversations I delayed. The paths I almost took. The words maybe later echoed louder than any clear rejection ever had. I realized that my past wasn't defined by what I chose, but by what I postponed until it expired. That was the cruel irony. I hadn't avoided consequences. I had just delayed them. And now they were all arriving at once. The decision I never made started revealing its shape through absence. Through the relationships that never deepened because I stayed non-committal. Through the work that never fulfilled me because I treated it as temporary for too long. Through the identity I never fully claimed because committing to one version meant letting the others die. I was terrified of closing doors. No one ever told me that doors don't stay open forever. Some of them don't close, they disappear. That realization broke something inside me. I started noticing how people spoke about their lives with a sense of ownership I didn't have. Even when they were unhappy, they sounded present. They spoke from inside their choices. I spoke from the outside, like a narrator describing a life rather than living it. I had built my identity around potential. Around what I could do, not what I was doing. Potential feels safe because it never fails. It also never becomes real. The moral dilemma became unavoidable. Was it better to choose late, knowing I had already lost time, or to continue avoiding the choice, knowing I would lose myself completely? Choosing now meant admitting that my waiting had cost me years I would never recover. That thought filled me with shame. It felt easier to stay still than to confront how long I had been hiding. But staying still was no longer neutral. I noticed how my body reacted when I imagined continuing the same way. Tightness in my throat. A heaviness in my limbs. A quiet panic that didn't spike, it settled. My body knew before my mind accepted it. I also noticed something else, something darker. Part of me wanted to believe it was too late, because if it was too late, then I wouldn't have to choose. Regret can become a shelter. A way to mourn without acting. I could tell myself the story of a life missed and never risk another failure. That scared me more than anything. Because it meant my avoidance was evolving. From hesitation, into resignation. I saw the future clearly then. Not dramatic. Not tragic. Just empty of direction. A continuation of reasonable days and quiet nights. A life where I would eventually explain my dissatisfaction as fate instead of fear. That was the moment the question changed. It was no longer what should I choose, it became what kind of regret can I live with, the regret of choosing and failing, or the regret of never choosing at all for the first time. The answer wasn't intellectual. It was physical. One regret felt sharp but alive. The other felt dull and endless. I understood then that avoiding the decision had already been a decision. And it was slowly killing my ability to feel like my life belonged to me. I didn't feel brave. I felt cornered by my own awareness. And sometimes, that's what change actually looks like. Not courage. But refusal to disappear quietly. I didn't wake up one morning feeling ready. There was no surge of confidence, no moment where fear finally stepped aside. What changed wasn't how I felt, it was what I was no longer willing to tolerate. I couldn't unsee what my life had become when shaped by avoidance. I couldn't go back to believing that waiting was neutral. So I chose. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I chose in a way that felt almost disappointing in its simplicity. I stopped keeping every door open. That was it. I accepted that choosing one direction meant losing others. That commitment meant grief. That clarity would cost me imagined futures I had never lived, but secretly depended on. Letting them go hurt more than I expected. Those unrealized versions of myself had kept me company for years. They were comforting because they never demanded action. I mourned them properly. And in that morning, something strange happened. For the first time in my life, my days began to feel heavier but more solid. Decisions stopped floating. They landed. Consequences arrived faster. Some of them hurt. Some disappointed people I cared about. I had to sit with that discomfort instead of explaining it away. But underneath the fear, something returned. Presence. I began to feel my life again, not as an idea, but as something happening in real time. Even on difficult days, there was a quiet sense of ownership. I wasn't watching myself from a distance anymore. I was inside my choices, fully exposed. That changed how regret felt. Regret was no longer this looming, abstract threat. It became specific, manageable, human. I regretted things I tried and failed at. I regretted words I spoke imperfectly. But those regrets were clean. They belonged to actions, not to years lost in hesitation. The older regret, the one built from avoidance, started to loosen its grip. I still think about what I lost by waiting. I don't romanticize my delay. Time doesn't come back just because you finally choose. Some doors are gone forever. Some versions of life remain permanently unlived. That's the truth no motivational speech can soften. But here's the other truth, the one I wish someone had told me earlier: a late choice is not the same as no choice. And a life redirected is not a life wasted. If you're listening to this and feeling suspended, caught between what you are and what you might have been, understand this: indecision feels safe only until it becomes your identity. Waiting feels responsible only until it costs you your voice. You don't need certainty to choose. You need honesty. Honesty about what staying is costing you. Honesty about what fear has been protecting you from. Honesty about the life you're slowly trading away for comfort. I avoided one decision my whole life because I thought choosing would limit me. I was wrong. Not choosing did. And the quietest tragedy isn't choosing the wrong path. It's standing still long enough. That life moves on. Without you.